morning, Richard.
Good
So
morning.
I'm Mega and I work with Purdue Polytechnic High School, and we've been working with Citizen Energy for this is the fourth year now. So yeah, we're pretty excited. Tell us about Citizen, tell us about you.
Okay, sure, yeah. So Citizens Energy, we are the local gas distribution company here in Indianapolis. That is our territory, all of Marion County, and we have a little bit of gas in Westfield and Hamilton County. We also provide water and wastewater services here in the metro area outside of Marion County. This is kind of little known, we actually have a chilled water and steam facility where we generate chilled water and steam. That facility, it actually happens to be very close to Lucas Oil Stadium, kind of across the street there. So that's also part of the Citizens group of utilities and services that we offer. Um, so yeah, it's a very old company, been around for well over 100 years. We have a very unique structure. We are not investor owned like a lot of utilities. We are directed by a board of directors, and so that are kind of appointed by the board of trustees. So we are kind of insulated from the politics of the city, but definitely have our board of directors and trustees that are made up of community members that we answer to, unlike investors and shareholder-owned companies. So it's actually a really good thing because we're always looking to as part of Citizens, we're not looking to add value to shareholders. We're looking to add value to our customers here in Marion County and the border counties that we serve.
Interesting. So tell us about your job. What do you
Sure,
do?
yeah. So a little bit about me. I was born here in Indianapolis. I grew up on the southeast side. In fact, I actually graduated from Franklin Central High School, and I won't tell you when. But so they're here on the southeast side, and I currently live in that same school district here in Franklin Township. When I was in high school, my dad was in construction, and I said I would never go into construction. And so I spent a year at IUPUI trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Then I transferred to Purdue, and 4 years later, I graduated with a degree in construction engineering and management. So see how that worked for me. And then in 2016, I got an MBA from the University of Indianapolis. And then right after I got out of college and after I graduated from Purdue, I worked in the construction industry. So those projects were really interesting. Started off working on wastewater and water plants all over, quite frankly. I worked in Maryland for a long time, outside of Baltimore. And then I had a really cool job I also worked on a wind farm, when I worked for that first company. Just north of Purdue and West Lafayette, there's a big wind farm. So we worked on that first phase of the wind farm, one of the projects that I worked on. After that, I worked for a tunnel company. So we traveled all over the country, drilling tunnels, crawling out of wet, muddy places. And I also did construction for a mechanical company. We were working for a manufacturer in Seymour, Indiana. We were running miles and miles of pipe for some of their testing facilities. And then almost 10 years ago, I landed with a cast company. And I started off as a project engineer. And right now I did that for about 5 years. And now I'm currently the manager of gas engineering. I think my official title is manager of energy distribution design. And so I guess kind of an overview of what the day-to-day looks like is kind of talk about the makeup of the group. Inside that group, we have a number of project engineers who do a lot of interesting things. They set our codes and standards. They do a lot of regulatory things, but they also have a lot of freedom to design projects. A lot of the one-off stuff that kind of doesn't fit the mold. They do a lot of problem solving and critical thinking and analysis is what a lot of we also have a flow modeling position where we do a hydraulic model of our system, so we kind of know where the weak points are. And then we also have, this is really interesting, we have a group of, they're called GIS editors. And so what they do is they maintain a geographic information system. The best way to explain it to a lot of people is it's like Google Maps, but for gas and facilities. And so it's a mapping system where we overlay on top of the streets of the city. We overlay where our facilities are in relationship to those, to roads and buildings and those kinds of things. And so that's kind of how we know and manage our system. And so we have about 9 people who do that day in and day out, just maintaining those records. As part of the gas industry, we have to maintain those records for the life of the pipe. But
So,
we also have a group of GIS analysts who are there to support the editors, but they're also kind of a source of innovation and interesting new ideas. A lot of the editing work is a paper-based process, but some of the GIS editor or analysts rather, they do a lot of work trying to digitize some of these old paper processes and try to bring us up to a little bit more modern technology.
so I'm going to take us back a little bit. When you said like your education has all been in construction and you were in hardcore construction
Mm-hmm.
from what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
But as teenagers, a lot of kids, and even as adults, a lot of us tend to think of like construction as construction buildings and all of those things. How does a construction graduate got into citizen energy, like energy and those tunnels and like pipeline systems design? How
How does
do
that work together? Yeah. So, believe it or not, there's a lot of correlation. And so inside, I manage a group of engineering. I have a partner, my peer, that he's the manager of construction. And so the engineering and construction work hand in hand to make the overall group of energy distribution. And so it was actually an easier transfer than what you might think, just because a lot of the group, um, we design and build projects. They just happen to be gas related. So I had a construction background. It was actually very beneficial when I was came to the gas company because we do manage the construction for all of our facilities. It's a different flavor than most of my classmates when I graduated don't work for utilities, but it kind of worked for me. I'll be honest. The construction industry is a hard life. They're, get laid off a couple times, and you start thinking, utilities, they never lay people off. It's pretty consistent. You don't have to travel, those kinds of things. So it works. It's been there were a lot of transferable skills, and I've really enjoyed my time here. Quite frankly, I don't want to leave.
that is really cool. So when you say you really like your job and you don't want to leave, uh, but I'm sure you encounter challenges every day within your job. What would be some of those challenges you would say?
Yeah. So yeah, there are some of the challenges that I see kind of on a daily basis are just the managing the mini schedules. There's a lot of competing interests for different projects and things. And we have a big group, and so there's always something to do or something else to thing. And so just managing these busy schedules is often one of the most challenging things to make sure everyone's moving in the right direction, they have what they need, and that we're not missing anything. And then that times everyone else, it can be a challenge.
So that would be your personal challenge on the job. What do you think as an industry, the energy sector, what is the biggest challenge with the energy sector right now?
Yeah, and so I can speak to the natural gas industry because that's what we're in. I think a big challenge inside our industry right now is vintage or legacy pipelines. And so what do I mean by that? These are pipelines that were or infrastructure installed using older technologies and materials. And so I'm thinking about pipeline, steel pipeline installed in the 40s, 50s, or 60s. And so the challenge is that also during that time, the construction standards were different, maybe a little bit more lax, and definitely the documentation requirements were not there. And so the challenge I think we face as an industry is understanding what's in the ground, in what condition it's in, and the installation methods. And so that's the challenge. How do you go back and find out stuff from 50 or 60 years ago? As an industry, that is definitely a challenge. part of our regulations, we have to create some plans, and the impetus of these plans is to understand and know and operate a safe system. And so how do you know what's in your system if you have bad records? And so that's definitely the challenge. And then there's also the scale, right? The scale of these things. So we have 4,000 miles of pipe, a distribution pipe, and by all accounts, we're a relatively small operator. And so inside the industry, there are operators that have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of miles of pipe. And so how do they, to understand that, I think is a big industry challenge.
So would you say that, I know you were talking about the GIS systems, would you say like that has been built to tackle that problem?
And so GIS is a really cool thing. So way back when we citizens started off keeping records, um, back before the digital age. We kept records on paper tickets, paper cards that kind of had details of routing and location. And then we also created paper maps. And so that's how, so if you want to know where something was, you had to find where you knew where you were, find the right map, and then get to it and hope something's changed since you got there. And so um, so the progression of that is GIS. And so what's cool about GIS is that it is that digital mapping system, but it also has the ability to store, we call them attribute tables. In essence, they're tables that have properties or characteristics of the pipeline, whatever that happens to be. And then it gives us the ability to query off of that. And so in essence, it's a database. It's a database that you can see, but also has tables that you can produce maps. And quite frankly, yes, you're right. That is kind of the direction we and as an industry are going, is a GIS-based solution. And we use that to understand our system and make business decisions about it.
I know when we went for the field trip, we were able to see those GIS systems, and they were able to show us on the tripods how they were placed to show those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the field collection part, right? And so historically, these paper tickets were, kind of made with some guy in a walk wheel, it's close, right? I wouldn't say it's probably within 3 or 4 feet maybe. And so what we're trying to do with those GPS units is we're trying to get down to less than 6 inches, 2 to 3 inches of accuracy is what we're trying to see of our facilities, so that we really know where they are. And so oftentimes those old walk wheel methods were based off of center lines of streets, and that's cool, that works when the streets are new. However, what we've seen over time, center lines of streets can shift, roads get widened, and so now so if you're referencing off the center line, but that center line no longer exists, so you're kind of like, maybe it's over here, right? We can trace it out and find it, but it just makes it a little harder. And so, but if you have GPS locations never change. And so it's more evergreen. It provides a digital record that can be queried and manipulated to do analysis and make decisions.
Outside of the GIS systems, how dependent would you say you are on the newer technology and everything that's coming, like with advanced?
Yeah, we as an engineering and gas operations are very dependent on technology. We're trying to utilize the GIS system more and more. That being said, we are still creating paper tickets for new construction and paper records that find their way to the editors, and then they turn it into a digital record. And so we still have paper processes at the end of the day. And so one of the initiatives we have inside the group is to get away from paper. That's part of our sources of innovation that we're trying to do. Paper is, well, it's messy. It can get lost. I mean, somebody losing a paper record, oh, that never happens, right? And so that causes, but if we have a digital record, we always have it. And then that saves time from a post-processing editing standpoint. And then now we've collected it in a digital form, we have it in a digital form, so then we can use that to, right, we've already populated tables, so we can use that as a basis for our analysis to make system decisions.
What about technology at the front end? Like this is more like at the back end, you're using all of this technology for your pipelines and stuff. Do you use a lot of technology at the front end, like customer facing?
I know we've done some this is like on the front end of design, we definitely do it electronically. We do it, the field collection is kind of on the front end, right, where we're actually out collecting digital records and then bring it into the post. As far as how customer service, I do know we've done some technology. I think we've implemented some bots. We've done some social media things, but that's kind of, it's out on the, I'm not the best person to speak to that. Let's put it that way. I know it's out there. I know we've done stuff. I'm not quite sure. I know we've done some data analytics and some other things to help drive how we develop our website. So we've done some billing things, but I'm not as familiar with that as I am like the engineering construction stuff.
Yeah. And moving to the whole idea of energy, like one of the when we think about citizens, we're thinking about in some way that just comes up. Like students always bring up the idea of clean energy, um, and I think that is the challenge of this generation with climate change and green energy and using more renewable forms of energy. Uh, what does citizen do in that uh, aspect of energy generation?
Yeah. So we've got, we are a natural gas company, and so we don't necessarily make it, right? It comes, we buy it, right? And so some of the things that we've done inside our companies, we've looked at CNG vehicles. We have a number of CNG vehicles in our fleet. So what are CNG vehicles? They are compressed natural gas vehicles. And so they produce less emissions than normal gasoline fired engines. So we're a gas company, we have a lot of gas, it kind of makes sense. So we use CNG vehicles inside our fleet. We have also got a solar farm at one of our wastewater plants that I think it's connected to the grid. I don't know that it supplies the plants or anything, but it's just connected to the power grid. And so I think at some of our older facilities, we've leased out some space for solar farms. So yeah.
So yeah, I am originally from India and Delhi, especially Delhi in India. There we have like the entire public transport runs on CNG.
Oh yeah, cool. Yeah. So yeah.
There was
Yeah.
like there was a time when I was in high school when it like the entire movement it started, the shift started to happen from diesel and petrol, from gas and diesel, petrol, that's what we call it, from gas and diesel to CNG. It caused like a lot of chaos for the few months because yes, it's easy to change, but it's also difficult to manage all of that aspect.
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? I mean, I think we've seen that. And I think electric vehicles see that as well. The challenge is the infrastructure in place to support these vehicles. So, you know,
Do you think there's ever going to be a time like here in US somewhere we would have CNG run public vehicles or even private vehicles?
yeah, I think so. I mean, there are they're gas company employees. There's a couple of gas company employees that have CNG vehicles. I do know that. Are you familiar with the concept of LNG, liquefied natural gas?
Hmm.
And so we supply gas to two LNG facilities here in Indianapolis, one on the northwest side and one on the southeast side. And so the one on the southeast side does not have the ability to vaporize or turn that liquid into gas and pump it into our system. The whole purpose of that point is to liquefy and load it into trucks. And then that facility has contracts with shipping companies, and they use that to power their trucks. I think it's at UPS, FedEx, somebody, yeah, uses LNG to run. And so this facility produces LNG and liquefied natural gas, and they take it and they use that to run their vehicles. And they've been very busy.
I know there were times because gas is pretty expensive, so people switch to CNG is relatively, at least in India, I know things are like differently priced. So it was so much more cheaper that people wanted to get their own cars. They started like the city was selling kits that you could install in your cars, and it would like switch from CNG to gas and kind of things.
Yeah, they're out there. Yeah, and the LNG is just another option. The trucking companies really liked it because they could lock in fuel prices in a big bulk, and there were less expensive to run their, it was more clean, more efficient than diesel, and it was less expensive when they were running their fleets, and they have, you know, hundreds or thousands of trucks.
Yeah, and I know you said you are working so CNG and then solar panels. All of this is, but would would you be able to tell us like where does Citizen get the energy? Like, is it like general? How is the energy that you get and you distribute? Where do you get it, and how
Sure.
does
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. And so there's, as we're talking about, just to back up a little bit, sorry, there is RNG as well inside our system. It makes up a very small percentage, very small. RNG, renewable natural gas, and so that is coming from the landfill. It's landfill gas that's coming up on the southwest side of town, and so we are starting to see a little bit of landfill gas in our system right now. So just as it's another renewable source that's coming. It is a challenging product. It takes a lot of processing to get it to something that we can use. It comes out as out of the ground. It's methane. It comes out of the ground as saturated in low BTU, and so it takes a lot of processing to dry it and purify it so you can bring the BTU up so that we can use it. So typically, what we'll see inside the normal gas quality standards, if you will, is 1,000 BTU gas and not saturated, relatively clean and dry. And so the gas is coming, you know, it's like half that BTU, it's 500 BTU. So that it becomes a challenge. There's some efforts to process it. And then certainly if you're relying on a processing plant, plants have upsets. And so, and we have to maintain our standards of gas, so that becomes a challenge. What happens in an upset condition, you know, if we don't meet the quality standards, those kinds of things. Sorry, I derailed that.
No, so in some ways, you what I'm hearing is that generating renewable form energy in that clean energy is, would you say, is not very economical or
In
feasible?
some instances, yeah. Yeah. What's making right now, there are, this is not a Citizens company. They just happen to bring this gas to the Citizen system. Um, but there are instances where there is a credit available, and I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head, that the government has incentive to incentivize renewable natural gas. And with right now in the current situation, without that credit, it is not economically viable. That's my understanding. Just because of the processing work that it does. And so that kind of leads me into where our gas comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think this will kind of maybe bring it together. Our gas historically has came from west to east. We have 5 sources of gas that come from, one kind of comes from Louisiana coming north. We have one south coming, we have one source kind of coming west, like Oklahoma, Texas. And then there's another source, historically came from that Oklahoma, Texas area, is actually now coming, actually 2 actually, coming from the east to the west. And so those are the Pennsylvania shale gases that we're starting to see. And so the impact of that, and I think this kind of ties into the RNG discussion, is that once that supply was tapped and brought to market, it drastically increased volume or increased supply, and so the price went down. And so right now, gas is at really low prices, as it has been, you know, compared to what it has been historically. And so in that instance, right now, some of the, you know, if you got a lot of processing and extra work to do, it may not be viable with what's actually on the market.
So does US have its own, like, do we use our own gas, or do we use the one that's exported or imported from?
Yeah, and so that's another good point. And so prior to the shale gas, that Pennsylvania, Ohio region gas, gas prices were going up, and we were wondering if we needed to find a source we as a country, wondering if we could meet ever increasing demand and have to import gas. And since the shale gas boom, if you will, for the first time in U.S. history, we're actually exporting gas. And so as it's exported as an LNG, as a liquefied natural gas. And that was 2 or 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago now. But yeah, so that was one benefit of the shale gas. Yes.
And when you talk about Pennsylvania shale gas, I don't know, somehow the word that pops in my head is fracking. Is that a big?
Yes, that is a fracking. Yes, and so what what made that gas viable was fracking. Yes.
Could you tell us what fracking is?
Now, let's take a look at how fracking actually works. First, a shaft is drilled several hundred meters into the earth. From there, a horizontal hole is drilled into the gas-bearing layer of rock. Next, the fracking fluid is pumped into the ground using high-performance pumps. On average, the fluid consists of 8 million liters of water, which amounts to about the daily consumption of 65,000 people, plus several thousand tons of sand and about 200,000 liters of chemicals. The mixture penetrates into the rock layer and produces innumerable tiny cracks. The sand prevents the cracks from closing again. The chemicals perform various tasks. Among other things, they compress the water, kill off bacteria, or dissolve minerals. Next, the majority of the fracking fluid is pumped out again. And now the natural gas can be recovered.
I think like these are some of the words we keep hearing, but I don't think a lot of us understand. And there's the entire anti-fracking movement, and like anti, even in Pennsylvania during the elections, that was like the thing. So yeah, interesting. And again, I know we're kind of switching between what is and what is aspirational. Like renewable energy is, like, I would say, aspirational in some sense. We want to all get there sometime. Do you see if in the future, some like in somewhere, maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 years from now, we all just depending on the renewable energy? Like, will that ever happen?
It might at some point, but I think as you think about it, um, a lot of plastics, a lot of the products we use are petroleum based, and so will we ever completely get away from oil or gas? In my opinion, probably not. But what I think will happen, and we're starting to see it, I think we're on the fringes of it. We're starting to see these different sources of energy start to creep into the market. And so I think those will start to get bigger and bigger as we move forward. We kind of saw it a little bit here in Marion County with coal. Um, so the power plant that IPL has on, or the power company has there on Harding Street, had 2015, so maybe 6 or 7 years ago, ran on coal. And we did a project to convert them, and now they completely only run on natural gas. So that it's, again, it was when we spoke with the IPL design group, there was a lot of benefit to running on gas, lower cost, lower risk, less emissions. It made, at that point, it made economic sense, and it was cleaner. So we've seen that as well with Perry K, our steam plant, the steam plant right across from Lucas Oil Stadium, uh, maybe 6 years ago. That was a coal-fired plant. It has since been converted to natural gas. So we're seeing it, right? We're starting to see, some of these, I think, shifts, right, from coal to gas. And I think fast forward, we'll start to see even more shifts to different sources. So in our world, I think we're seeing, when you talk to some of our peers, they are seeing in different parts of the country, we're starting to just see a little bit of RNG, but they're really starting to, they're really starting to see a surge. The RNG is really coming. They're starting to, actually be significant into their supply plan.
And as you have like younger people coming and working into Citizens, like let's say there is a group of young college civil, even engineering graduates that come into the energy sector, uh, are you starting to see them bringing new ideas with the clean green kind of movement, the renewable sources? Do you see like the emphasis even at the education levels shifting?
Not yet. I do have one engineer who has an engineering degree in energy from IUPUI. He has some ideas, but not, you know, again, it's got to be economically viable. It has to make sense, and at least from our standpoint, right? Trying to get gas and heat people's houses here in the city. But yeah, he hasn't, not yet. I think, you know, it's coming. Certainly, we've definitely had some interest from college students to want to see some of our solar farms and some of the other things. We've done some tours and stuff. So yeah, it's there. I think, you know, long term, it'll be a mix of what makes sense economically, what's viable, what's, you know, certainly, you know, wind energy, you know, in an urban area doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You can't make a big solar farm in the middle of an urban area. You can't, you know, yeah, right. Although it'll be a mix of what makes sense of where you are. You know, if you're in the desert or you're, you know, outside in the Southwest, big solar farm makes sense. Yeah. So though, you know, I think even wind, but yeah, as we move, I think those renewable sources that are economical and make sense will certainly find their way onto the market for that location.
And as an end user, do you think I will have, or I will ever have the choice to tell citizens like, hey, I want my energy from renewable source and not from the grid, or it?
I know you can for the power company, that is an option. I do know that here in Marion County. I do know that that's an option for citizens. Right now, currently, the supply is just not there. So we don't necessarily have enough sources of natural gas to say it's renewable.
So for the power company, you're saying that that option exists?
I believe that option exists, yes.
So as an end user, I can ask, like, I want clean energy to my house, and
yeah, there's a fee, I believe, but yes.
That's good to know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're gonna, obviously it'll be a little more, but if that's what you'd like to do, I think you can do that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think we've covered most of our questions here. The one thing that I wanted to ask you was like the word. We usually start off our projects with a theme word. So our word for this cycle is energy. I know you're in the citizens, you're in that sector, but when you just think of the word energy, what are some of the things that come to your mind?
And see, I'm biased. I think of gas, right? But that, yeah, but it, you know, it's that energy, that combustible, in my mind, is a combustible source that heats homes and keeps people cook with. But as you broaden out, it's that source that, you know, everyone uses, relied upon. You have to have it, right? So to power to everyday life.
And we often take for granted.
We do. Wow. Yeah, we certainly do. You don't. My wife is familiar with some of the, you know, infrastructure work that I've done, and she'll look at me. She's like, man, I never took so much effort and thought and work for something that I don't even think about. So yeah, you flip the light switch, you turn your stove on, your furnace kicks on, and you don't even think about it. And so quite honestly, that's our goal as the utility, right? We don't want you thinking too much about it. We want it to be working just like it does every day. So that's our goal.
It's only on the day you lose the power you realize the
day the lights don't come on or the furnace doesn't kick on, that hey, we got a problem.
The last time there was a storm and there was power outage here, I was like, okay, let's just have dinner and go to bed. It's okay. It's not that cold today. And then I turned the gas. I realized, like, oh my God, like this works on electricity too.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So no warming up dinner today. But yeah, so thank you so much.
Don't mind. I have a question that I think might benefit some of our students, like long term. In terms of some of the jobs that are available at Citizens, what are a couple of jobs that are really interesting that maybe people don't think of when they think of your industry?
Yeah. I had on my to-do list. Yeah, some of those things we can talk about. Yeah, so there's some really interesting jobs. GIS editor, right? Who'd have thought? There's 7 or 8 people, all they do all day, every day, is to maintain records and do mapping work. There are degrees in GIS from IUPUI right now. So that's I can assure you, when I was in engineering school, that made no sense to me, but it makes a lot of sense now. So that's one interesting job that you don't necessarily think about. One thing else, I would encourage students to think about is to think, you have an engineering degree, and if you have an engineering degree, don't get pigeonholed. A lot of engineers find themselves doing things that they didn't necessarily didn't think they would be doing when they graduated college. I know I'm one of them. I thought I would be in the construction industry, and here I am working for a utility. And so those are, sometimes, I've seen it in college students, they kind of get pigeonholed to these ideas. And I think, keeping an open mind, you can find engineers in a lot of interesting places. You can find them working for manufacturers, doing like product testing and those kinds of things. But also you'll find engineers in the sales roles. Because, engineers like to speak to other engineers. And so if you have a technical person, they want to communicate with another technical person to make sure that they're meeting the needs or the parameters of their project. So that's another interesting place you never know you might find engineers is with attorneys. Oftentimes attorneys can be in very technical legal disputes, and they need the expertise of engineers to kind of help them understand that. So those are some interesting things that I've seen over the course of my career. And then some interesting other jobs inside the utility that there are, let's see here. The engineers have an interesting job, but the thing, it's pretty classic engineering things. But the other thing that's interesting is we have a lot of construction work as an intern, as a utility. We do that internally. We do a lot of that internally. We manage that internally, rather. And so there's a lot of opportunity to manage crews and coordinate. That doesn't, for utility, well, that doesn't make sense. But yeah, there's a lot of, ability to do that too. So, yeah, and we're a utility, so there's always IT jobs for software engineering, those kind of things.
And just like you landed from construction to utilities, there are a lot of engineers or other fields that you would see every day in your.
Yeah, you certainly interact. I do know that inside the natural gas industry, you don't necessarily go to school to become a pipeline engineer. I think there's a few programs in Oklahoma or Texas where that makes sense, but just about everywhere else, no. And so when we're hiring engineers, we often make the assumption that they don't have any gas experience. So generally what we're looking for when we're hiring, and quite honestly, even the GIS editors, a lot of them, it takes some technical knowledge. A lot of them don't know a lot about it. And so generally when we're hiring, I think this is a key takeaway for some of your students, is that we're looking for, at least when I'm hiring, I'm looking for attitude, work ethic, and ability to learn. And so when we go through our interview process, those are some of the key things that, some of the questions and observations that I'm really looking for. So, because I've already made, the assumption that we're going to have to teach you what you need to know. So really, how teachable are you is really what that question answers. And so I think that's a key takeaway from, a lot of your students to, work hard, have a good attitude, be willing to learn, and I think it'll take you a long way.